and welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Scint.
I'm Axion.
And we are continuing our read-through discussion of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets in our playthrough of Final Fantasy V. Today's topic, we're going to touch on the idea of justice and the presence of scapegoats and how that interferes with the idea of justice. So, Harry Potter tends to touch on this quite a lot because, as with most books aimed at a younger audience, it doesn't shy away with introducing kids to the concept that the world is not fair. And in some ways, more explicitly than others. This didn't really come up in the first book, but in the second book, we are introduced to the concept of, well, the wizarding jail of Azkaban, and the fact that Ministry of Magic will punish the misuse of magic. Whether or not they get the right person, however, is a little bit debatable, as we have two specific instances I want to look at that are explicitly part of the plot that Harry sees. You have anything you want to throw in, Axion, before I start going off on a tangent?
No, that sounds like a pretty good sum up.
Alright, so the first case is probably the one that people are going to think of because, well, it comes up first, and it's to do with our old pal, Dobby. Everybody loves Dobby and all the trouble he causes. I don't know why, but... So, Dobby appears at the behest of, well, Dobby himself, wanting to warn Harry about, things going wrong at Hogwarts that year. He doesn't want Harry to get hurt, so he decides, okay, I'm going to get Harry in trouble by performing magic, which gets a letter sent from the Ministry of Magic explicitly telling Harry that he is in trouble for casting spells without basically being registered as such, which he didn't actually do. So, the letter itself, word for word: Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening at 12 minutes past 9. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school, and further spellwork on your part may lead to expulsion from said school. We would like you to remember that any magical activity that risks notice by members of the non-magical community is a serious offense under Section 13 of the International Confederation of Warlocks Statute of Secrecy. Enjoy your holidays. Yours sincerely, Mafalda Hopkirk, Improper Use of Magic, Office, Ministry of Magic.
That sounds like lots of fun. Bureaucracy.
I mean, like, take it from somebody who has played a lot of bureaucratic characters, it can be fun if you do it right. It's also a really easy way to set up lawful evil because, I mean, come on, seriously, it's using the rules as a weapon.
Yep.
Which is basically what Dobby ended up doing there, and we kind of get the idea from just how often Dobby shows up to tell him, I warned you not to come back, and all the stuff Dobby tried to do to keep Harry from Hogwarts. I think he would have been cool with expelling him.
Yep.
But yeah, there's actually quite a bit to unpack in that letter. They had his exact residence, which is on record with the Hogwarts letter, so that makes sense. But they had the exact time at which the spell was cast as well. Yet they still managed to get the wrong caster.
Which tells me at least that it's being done by location rather than by, like, tracking the person themselves. We are watching wherever young wizards happen to currently be and keeping an observation on them, and if we detect any magic in the area where there is not an adult to be an obvious source of legal magic, i.e. the Weasleys, it must obviously be this appropriate underage wizard using magic among muggles.
Yep. So that probably is how, like, you get stories throughout the various stories about my older sibling did this magic when I was a kid, but they've never gotten a letter. Because I'm pretty sure there would basically be a file cabinet for Fred and George at this point.
Oh, definitely.
And Hermione actually also is interesting at this point, because if you remember in the first book, she mentions that she's tried a few simple charms already and they've all worked, but no letter in sight for her, which kind of makes you wonder, is there like a grace period for like, okay, you've just learned this and you haven't screwed up too badly, and so there's a lot of questions there, which seems to kind of come down to it works as the plot needs it to work, which is frustrating in some ways, but you know how it goes.
Right.
They said build a bridge, and all I can think of is Atlantis, and I don't see a pillar tall enough for that to work.
Hey, look! I built a bridge. Took me like 2 seconds.
Yep. But yeah, I can honestly see them surveilling the area rather than the specific caster, though this does lead to basically Harry being made a scapegoat by Dobby, who we get the impression under Wizarding law isn't really regarded as a legal entity into himself. So it could be that they saw it was Dobby and decided to charge the only wizard they could. It could be that they didn't register Dobby on whatever centers they had. But what we do know is that this leads to Uncle Vernon taking full advantage of the situation and deciding, oh, you can't use magic? In that case, you can't return to magic school, and there's nothing you can do about it. Which can kind of be read as a commentary, if you want to, on the unintended consequences of enacting justice unilaterally. You send out the standard form letter to what is perceived to be an underage wizard pulling a prank, and you accidentally set off all of the buttons for his rough home life to rear their ugly head and put him in a far worse position than his transgression merits, particularly when you consider that Harry didn't actually do anything.
That hurts.
Yeah. See, this is why cartoons always warn you about quicksand. It's a much bigger threat than you think. What I find interesting is that the Weasleys also find out about this notice pretty quickly because, well, if it's a form letter, it goes off through all the bureaucracy, and since Mr. Weasley works at the Ministry in a different department, he can hear about this a little bit ahead of other people.
Right.
So when the Weasleys come to pick him up and break him out using a car that Mr. Weasley enchanted, so again, no letter for Fred and George for taking a flying car across the British countryside at night, I can guarantee there was at least one amateur astronomer who saw the car and thought they were having a stroke.
I mean, that actually is kind of a plot point later, with people spotting Ron and Harry flying into the...
Yep, when they do it in broad daylight after Dobby locks them out. But yeah, on that time, it is kind of fitting that, you know, there's an inquiry into Mr. Weasley for enchanting a muggle car, leading to this reckless misuse of magic by his youngest son, because at that point, yeah, we the readers side with them because they needed to get to school one way or another, but it's at least a consequence of some sort for something that they actually did. Right. Justice falling on somebody who actually transgressed in some way, even if it is something that is relatively harmless, but at the same time is very dangerous for the wizarding world at large, exposing a large potential pool of people to magic.
Right.
On the other hand, we have the other example of a scapegoat brought up much later in the book when the basilisk has been attacking people with, under Voldemort's direction, puppeteering of Ginny Weasley.
Right.
Which you can kind of see is the writing's already on the wall, because this is after Harry has gotten a trip through Tom Riddle's memory to see that Hagrid was expelled 50 years ago because he had some sort of monster in the castle that was presumed to be the heir of Slytherin's beast, which we find out ourselves is actually just a giant spider, which is an entirely different flavor of horrible problem to have on the school grounds, but not the one that is actively petrifying and potentially killing students.
I was about to say, that's still a big creepy spider, and it probably shouldn't be in the school, and it's probably not healthy for Aragog to be there for himself, but
yeah, It's a problem, but it's not the problem we are currently trying to solve, which means that Hagrid's punishment was entirely unjust.
Yes.
Moreover, we know that he was specifically, quote-unquote, caught by the person who actually did it, who used the fact that he had been banking on his perfect grades and his good reputation to keep himself above suspicion.
Right.
So, at that point, you know that the justice system is flawed when it becomes just a case of he said, she said, no actual interrogation, no actual intervention by an authority figure until after the expulsion had already gone through. Because we know that Dumbledore steps in to keep Hagrid around as gamekeeper so he's not left completely to the wolves on his own.
Right.
But Dumbledore, not being the headmaster at that point, was not able to intervene to prevent him being expelled under false pretenses.
Yeah, just saved him from a worse fate, basically.
Yeah.
Which then we get to see what that worst fate might have been when Hagrid gets basically blamed for everything again later in the story.
Yeah. So, if you are one of the outsiders in this, such as Cornelius Fudge, who happens to be coming in with, the arrest orders for Hagrid, which, by the way, he's getting arrested and sent to Azkaban. If you're the Minister of Magic in this case, and you don't know the intricate details that Harry and possibly Dumbledore do, that Tom Riddle is actually the heir of Slytherin, that Tom Riddle opened the chamber and let the monster out and framed Hagrid, then you know that these attacks happened 50 years ago, and the person who was expelled for it last time is still on the grounds. With the false set of data he was given, it is an entirely logical and reasonable assumption to make that Hagrid was guilty because of the flaws present in the justice system the first go-around. So it's kind of hard to be angry at somebody for making the best logical decision they can when they're working with a contaminated data set and they don't know it's contaminated.
Yeah, the biggest problem is the lack of willingness from people to do a proper investigation and just relying on, and this is talking about in the past, and just relying on the first so-called trustworthy student to come along and provide a good scapegoat.
Especially because, we can see with the current cast of characters that you can have a very, very devious mind in a very, very respectable shell. Because whose plan was it to break into the Slytherin dorms to interrogate Malfoy?
I believe
Hermione.
It was Hermione's.
Yeah, Hermione, the ace student, top of everything, never steps out of line, horrified at breaking rules and getting expelled, is the ones who propose most of their more dangerous ideas and come up with the most plausible ways for them to pull them off. So we already know that just being a goody two-shoes publicly doesn't mean that you're never going to be up for some shenanigans. So if you've had any interaction with Hermione, you can probably already be a little bit suspicious of Riddle in his memories. Because he's only presenting himself in the best possible light, because obviously it's his diary, he's going to do that. But it's just a little bit too neat a package, presented right in the middle of the book, so you know you've still got a couple hundred pages left. So, yeah, you know it's too neat to wrap up and just assume it's Hagrid. Something is going to be off, and we later find out, oh yeah, we were following the murderer the whole time!
It's all coming from inside the house.
Which actually makes me wonder something about Myrtle's death. She saw the basilisk, but she would have been there, so she could have seen Riddle come out right after, possibly. But, don't know.
Yeah, this is one of those we're not operating with enough information again.
Yep, or could just be overthinking, because, that's my jam.
I was about to say, as we do.
But anyway, Harry wants to go figure out some more information about things, so he goes down. He takes the invisibility cloak and goes down to see if he can talk to Hagrid. But he doesn't have long before Cornelius Fudge shows up, along with Lucius Malfoy and Dumbledore. Dumbledore is basically there to kind of moderate Fudge's language and kind of keep things somewhat sane for Hagrid. Yeah, Hagrid is being sent to Azkaban because, based on the knowledge that Fudge has available, Hagrid was responsible last time and it's happening again. you are not safe to be let to roam free. Unfortunately, as we don't find out much about Azkaban in this book, we'll go into more detail next time when we get to the Prisoner of Azkaban. This is the only recourse the Wizarding Society has for people who are not on the straight and narrow. So, regardless of the crimes, because like there are, you get someone a wand that you could just say like vaguely Latin gibberish, and you can basically make the sky implode. Yeah, you're gonna have need for a jail, and what they have is a little bit less jail and a little bit more torture chamber.
I was about to say torture chamber.
So, yeah, Hagrid's getting sent to Wizard Guantanamo for something he didn't do, and yeah, that's really the end of it. Then Malfoy comes in with basically saying that the school board of governors has voted to oust Dumbledore, which again we later find out that by voted they mean Lucius basically threatened to curse their families or something if they didn't agree. And as soon as they found out how bad things had gotten at Hogwarts, they immediately wanted Dumbledore back to fix it, because for all of Dumbledore's eccentricities, he gets the job done, which later books will kind of raise the question of how good a thing that is, but for now, Dumbledore has his hand on the situation and things are fine-ish. And even better, Fudge tries to make this sound better by just saying, "Look at it from my point of view, I'm under pressure, got to be seen doing something. If it turns out it wasn't Hagrid, he'll be back if no more said, but I've got to take him, wouldn't be doing my duty otherwise. Take me where? For a short stretch only. Not a punishment, Hagrid, more a precaution. If someone else is caught, you'll be let out with a full apology. Not Azkaban." So, Fudge knows that he is just doing something for the sake of doing something, because the perception of action is more important to the public at large than true justice. So, Hagrid is just going to be a cog in the machine, ground up and forgotten. His case kind of just one in who knows how many of wizards who could have been sent quite wrongly to Azkaban. And we'll get into more detail again when Azkaban becomes more fleshed out in the series. But it's a torture chamber, so it's okay, Hagrid. If you're not guilty, we'll let you right out of the torture chamber and everything will be fine. It's like we can just pretend the trauma didn't happen.
I mean, trauma is kind of just not something that gets overly considered with regards to Azkaban. And like we said, I don't want to get too far down that particular rabbit hole before the next book. But it's... like you said, it's more about appearing to do the right thing, to do something, than to take the time to do the right thing.
Yep. And, well, that tends to be what happens when you have an elected position. So it's one of the downfalls that we have of democracy, is sometimes the more logical thing to do is to wait and gather more information before you go down a bad path. But that also tends to, as Fudge said, lead people to think that you don't care, that you're not doing anything. So you have to move and do something, make some sort of public statement on issues happening, regardless of whether or not it is actually the correct choice right now. So, yeah, I think Fudge is fully in the wrong here, but that could also be from the fact that, you know, I'm looking at this from the reader's perspective, where we have a lot more information than he does.
Right.
But he also didn't bother to investigate.
Oh, we can't walk on that side.
So, I guess kind of the message here is that since the reader is very, very easily able to see just how tenuous the justice system in the Harry Potter universe actually is, that injustice is something that is a part of the world, it needs to be fought, and it can only be countered by uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous it is. Harry literally almost dies in clearing Hagrid's name and saving Hermione and Ginny's lives.
And I mean, he almost died last time when he was dealing with Quirrell. So...
yeah, so we get the impression with the Quirrell fight, like, since Dumbledore managed to have a lot more information than Harry thought he did, that Dumbledore was there to pull him out. Dumbledore was nowhere near Hogwarts at the time.
Yeah.
Harry literally only survived because he happens to somehow summon Fawkes to him, and Phoenix Tears are OP.
Oh,
He got a
stole the
Senzu
battle
beam,
axe.
basically. But they still have it. But, yeah. So, I'm not really sure what else I can say, just riffing off of the book in terms of justice and scapegoating. But what do you have to say before we move on?
I think probably the next logical place to go in this conversation would be Ginny.
Yep.
And how she was kind of used as the term that comes more to mind immediately is puppet for her interaction with Voldemort. But she is kind of his scapegoat. She is his sacrificial lamb in the case that anything goes wrong with this particular plan. It won't hurt him any because it's just the magic of the journal, and the journal can make itself essentially invisible to anyone that it doesn't want to know what's going on. But everything goes back to Ginny.
Which in a way means it goes back to Lucius Malfoy, because Ginny's only in that position because he shoved the book into one of her second-hand books. So she thought it was fine since she got it from a store and trusted it. But yes, she is set up to basically have the dual position of if she gets caught, she's the scapegoat. If she doesn't, she's a victim and I get to make Arthur Weasley punished either way. But yeah, poor Ginny at this point in this novel has very, very little agency of her own. And we see a few instances of her trying to figure out how to ask for help, and it just doesn't work out for a variety of reasons. The biggest one I can think of being Percy walking in at the exact worst time, and assuming that what Ginny wanted to talk about was you getting a party wipe. Was
Those
her
dudes are
walking
tough.
up. Yeah. Percy jumps to the conclusion that Ginny is going to tell Harry and company that she saw Percy kissing one of the Ravenclaws. Which, no, Ginny was probably going to say, I don't remember the last several days, something is wrong with me, please help. But Percy happens to show up, and Percy being Percy, happens to have an aura of smug bad enough to scare her off. Which, could be something to be said about, how useful are authority figures when you have a justice system that basically doesn't really work.
And as we saw from Voldemort, kind of incentivizes getting the wrong person as long as you get them quickly enough to keep public outcry at bay. It doesn't
Which
matter
there
if you
can
get...
be a lot of commentary said about,
Oh yeah, definitely.
other things in the real world, but I don't
Yeah.
really want to cherry pick news articles right now because we're talking about Harry Potter and I'm in my happy place and I'd like to stay there.
But that is kind of the thing, is it's the perception, at least, that society doesn't care if it's the person who actually did it who's being punished. They just want to see some punishment.
And I think that's going to come up again when we talk about Prisoner of Azkaban, because,
Absolutely.
well, I mean, the whole title of the book basically talks about a prisoner of Azkaban, and we know already just from Hagrid's reaction that Azkaban ain't no good. But yeah, probably best to save that till next time.
Yep. But yeah, with Ginny... Oh, crap. Forgot I have to go this way. With Ginny, the full expectation was that if anything went wrong with Voldemort's scheme, she would take the brunt of the bait because she was just the human puppet, basically, doing the wishes of the spell in the book.
One other thing I do want to talk about with this is Lockhart, and what happens to him at the end, because if we're going to talk about justice, there's something kind of nice to be said about a character solely defined by his narcissism and his need to take credit for everything so he can be seen as a hero, kind of bullied by his own PR into saying he will attempt to go rescue Ginny from the Chamber of Secrets because he keeps bragging about how he can figure this out and he is so much smarter and more intelligent and more capable than everyone else, to get caught in the act of running away by two 12-year-olds who guilt-trip gang press him into coming with them because they're going to do it if he can't. And because they know too much, he tries to wipe their memories so he can run away without having to do anything, and it backfires, and he can remember nothing about anything he's ever stolen credit for or bragged about. It might not be the wizarding justice system, but there's something symmetrical and almost poetic about that.
I mean, it's... in a visceral way, it's very satisfying. It's like, that's karma.
Yep, and it'll come back later in I believe it's the 5th book, which we can talk a little bit more about that later and see if we still feel that it's just, but for now, I'm not really sure what else I can say about Chamber of Secrets and looking at justice and scapegoats.
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up, and had a pretty good time, too, as we finally reached the little town we were trying to get to.
Alright, in that case, we will pick this up next time, and hopefully things are a little bit fairer in your life than they are for the entirety of Wizarding Britain.
Yep. See y'all next time.